Have you ever heard of a place called Ravenshade? It's this quiet, almost forgotten town where everyone knows one rule: never go near Hollow Hill after midnight. The locals don't really explain why, but they sure do look at you funny if you ask. There's this kind of unspoken tension about it. And if you ask the older folks, they'll tell you they've seen things they'll never talk about again. But Ethan? He wasn't one to care about superstitions. He was one of those guys who laughed off ghost stories and called them all a bunch of made-up nonsense. It's just the fog playing tricks on people, he'd say with a smirk. So, one stormy night, when the clock struck midnight and the fog rolled in thicker than usual, he decided to test it out for himself. He grabbed his flashlight, made sure his phone was charged, and set off for Hollow Hill. The trees swayed in the wind, like they were whispering secrets to each other, but Ethan just kept walking. The ground was slick, his boots sinking into the wet earth. Still, he wasn't scared, not even a little. The fog wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, but he pushed forward, thinking this was all just a joke. When he reached the top of the hill, though, everything changed. Here it was freezing, like cold in a way that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And then he heard it. At first, it was so faint he thought it was just the wind. "Help me," Ethan paused, looking around. Nothing, just shadows and the mist. Maybe he imagined it, right? I mean, it was so foggy, it was easy to see things that weren't there. But then it came again. This time, louder, more desperate. "Please, help me." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight across the hill. And that's when he saw her girl, standing just a few feet away. Her eyes were wide, almost like she hadn't blinked in days. Her dress was torn, and she was so pale it was like the fog was inside her. "He's coming." Her voice was shaking. Ethan was still trying to process it when he asked, "Who's coming?" Before she could answer, the air turned even colder. And that's when it hit him: he wasn't alone. The fog parted for a moment, and there it was. A figure, tall, too tall, like it wasn't quite human. And its eyes, those eyes weren't eyes at all. They were black holes. The girl screamed, but before Ethan could react, that thing, it lunged. Ethan didn't even think. He bolted. His flashlight went flying as he ran, slipping and stumbling over the wet earth. The fog felt alive, wrapping around his legs, pulling him back toward the figure. He could hear it breathing, slow and steady, but it wasn't coming from behind him. It was coming from everywhere. Then, something even stranger happened. He tripped and fell hard to the ground. But when he looked up, the figure was gone. Gone, but the fog didn't lift. It was thicker than ever, swirling around him, almost suffocating. He looked around, and that's when he saw them faces. Faces staring out from the mist. Pale, hollow eyes watching him. He couldn't see their mouths, but he could feel them smiling. It was like they were waiting for something, waiting for him. The whispers started again, faint at first, but then louder, closer. And just as he was about to run again, everything stopped, dead silent. The next morning, search teams went out to look for him. They didn't find much, just his flashlight at the top of Hollow Hill flickering weakly, almost like it was still waiting for him to come back. They tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. They thought maybe he'd just gotten scared and run off. But when they checked his last messages, they found something chilling. The last voicemail wasn't a message to someone else. It was from him, Ethan's voice, desperate and breathless. "Help me." Then there was a laugh, a low, guttural laugh. That's when people started to talk. The town had never been the same since. You see, Hollow Hill wasn't just a place, it was something older, something darker than anyone ever realized. And the truth is, those faces, they don't go away. They just wait. And now, if you're ever in Ravenshade, and you see that fog rolling, you might hear a voice in the distance. "Help me." And it might be calling for you next.